Great. Hello, welcome. I'm Paul Massey. I'm talking today about estimates and contracts. Make sure you're in the right talk. I've made that mistake before. Sat down in the wrong room. We're now estimates and contracts. So my name is Paul Massey. I'm the founder and director of a company called Bluefruit Software. We develop embedded software for equipment manufacturers. So we do medical devices, aerospace, scientific instrumentation, all those things. We work on a contract basis, so we have customers of all different sizes, from little startups through to big blue chips. Some of those customers have their own software teams, some don't have any software capability, so we provide that software outsourcing service to our customers. We've been Agile since 2008. That's Agile with a capital A. I like to think we've actually been Agile from the start, but we weren't formally. So by that I mean that we were good at listening to our customers, responding to emergent knowledge. But when we were small, and there were just 3 or 4 of us, that was easy for us to do. And so it was a relief really to find some processes which enabled us to do that while we scaled the business. And there's now about 40 of us in the business, and we're based here in Cornwall, just down the road in Redwood. So all of that has kind of given me lots of experience and given me lots of time to think about estimates and contracts. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that because it's an important part of how we work and how we work with our customers. So that's about me and Bluefruit. Today I'm going to cover 3 areas really. First of all, I'm going to explore about what I mean by estimates and why do we estimate. I think it's quite important to spend a bit of time just exploring the problem space a bit. What are the drivers? And I'm going to use a technique, hopefully get a bit of participation, to do a 5 whys to understand why we estimate. Then I'm going to talk about some alternative solutions. So that 5 whys should help us understand the problem space. What problems are we trying to solve with estimating? And I think a good question to ask is, are there any other ways of solving those problems? So I'll talk you through 3 alternative solutions. And then finally I'll get on to talking about how those alternative solutions might impact how we think about our contract. So first of all, just so we're all on the same page, what are estimates? Well, basically they are predictions about our engineering activities. We're trying to forecast how long certain things are going to take us to achieve or how much they're going to cost. That's quite a hard thing to do because engineering is about discovery. It's about exploring unknowns and unknown unknowns, and so we're trying to guess really how long those things are going to take. And if we don't acknowledge quite how much guesswork is involved there, then I think we end up putting too much pressure and too much emphasis on the accuracy of those estimates. So traditional estimates would be estimating days, like non-agile estimates, and budgeting in pounds. Under Agile, we have a bit of a toolkit. We use points and planning poker, and then that gives us the size of things in points. And then we work in sprints and we establish a velocity, and then we can use some kind of pricing model to figure out how much we're going to charge per point or per sprint. Or we've been through lots. Bluefruit has been through lots of iterations of fixed price, fixed scope, fixed price per point. We've been through the lot and experimented with all of those. So I'm hoping to share some of those experiences today. So, quick show of hands. How many people know the 5 whys technique? You've come across that before? About half the people here. Okay, I'll explain a little bit what it is. It's an interrogative technique used to determine the root cause. So basically, it's what your 5-year-old child does, is ask why, and we drill down until we reach the root cause. You don't actually have to ask 5 times. The name's just there to remind you to make sure you've asked it lots of times to really get to that root cause. And you can have a bit of a tree because you can have multiple answers. And an important part of the technique as well is once you've kind of established this tree of answers, to find solutions across those levels. So I found this little example on Wikipedia. If your car doesn't start, you ask, why hasn't it started? So that's the problem that we start with, and we say, why? Well, the battery's dead. Well, why is the battery dead? The alternator's broken. It isn't working as it should. Why? The alternator belt is broken. We're getting there, and we're starting to understand now why we've got a flat battery. But why is the belt broken? Well, it was used beyond its useful service life, and it wasn't replaced when it should have been. Why? Because it wasn't maintained according to the service schedule. Now we've kind of explored down to the root cause, and it's really helpful to come up with a solution to the root cause. Let's make sure that we start servicing according to the schedule. But just addressing the root cause isn't enough, because you've still got a flat battery. You've still got a short-term problem that needs addressing. So you should charge the battery. And actually, you should replace the alternator belt as well. And so you need solutions across all those levels. So that's part of the technique. So now I've got this plan to try doing a 5 whys with everybody. It's going to rely on some tech working. And it's going to rely on you being able to read my handwriting as well, which might be a problem. But we'll see how it goes. I'm just going to dip out of there a minute. And I'm going to try and writing. So, let's start with F10. So, why estimate is the first question. Have we got anyone who wants to kick off things with some ideas of why do you think we estimate? Any thoughts? For budgets? Yeah. For budgets. So, why do we want to fit things into budgets? Find value. Any other reasons for trying to fit things into budgets? Make sure it fits. Make sure it's affordable. I mean, and why do we want to know if it's affordable? Yeah. So there's maybe an investor or so can we think of any other reasons why we estimate? For time constraints, yeah. So it's not just about the money. So for time. So why do we want to know the time it's going to take? The release schedule? And why is the release schedule important? Sorry, say again? To manage it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's part of the schedule, yeah? Again, so it's about when do we get value? Okay. Any other thoughts about why we choosing supplier or choosing project or choices? Yeah, so choices and kind of comparing. And that might be the one I said, which is suppliers, or comparing suppliers, or it might just be internal project choice. So exploring the, we can explore either of those. So in terms of Why does it affect project choice? Value for money, mostly profitability. Yeah. Yeah. So we've got two there really, cheaper and profit. Yeah. So that's here somewhere as well. Buy, make. Oh yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? One over there? Manage expectations. Yeah, absolutely. So that's back here about the time. Manage expectations. And why is it important to manage expectations? Yeah. Yeah. Negotiate. And perhaps just keep everyone happy, really. I mean, if you are unhappy, yeah. If you successfully manage their expectations, then is that legible to all you? You heard what was said anyway, it doesn't matter, does it? Okay, great. Well, I think that covers quite a wide range. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just park that and come back to it at the end. So I'm going to explore some alternative solutions, perhaps for some of those, and then we'll see how well those fit. I did one with my team, just in case you guys can come up with anything. I knew you would. In similar kind of things, understanding project feasibility, being held to account. Maybe we might want to be held to account because there's a lack of trust, because someone's had their fingers burnt before, that kind of thing. I think we covered most of that. So, some alternative solutions. Some of them I think we hinted at a little bit with some of the exploration. So, the first one I'm going to suggest is moving the focus to value. So, estimates themselves are quite cost-focused. And this isn't always very healthy for relationships or healthy for projects. So what do I mean exactly? Found these couple of definitions. We've got cost efficiency, which is about how many units can be made per dollar, or how many points can we get through per day. This is kind of velocity. Velocity does focus on cost. Whereas value is how much effort is required to make profit. So let me give an example in the software world. So I have lots of conversations about our customers about investing time in doing test-driven development. Quick show of hands, who's familiar with test-driven development or knows what it is? About 2/3 of people. So test-driven development is a technique we use where we write automated unit tests around the software that we produce, around the components of the software that we produce. And it adds a lot of value because it not only does it test our code better, but it actually acts as a form of documentation. It encourages our team to refactor, which is an important technique for, we talk about doing the washing up. It's about staying on top of things and keeping our things serviceable and maintainable. It's also enables group ownership, prevents regression. It's got all these kind of valuable things. But we're writing more code, so it takes a little bit longer, at least in the short term. So we have to sell that to our customers. Now, if we only looked at cost, you wouldn't do it unless you at least looked in the long term. But if you look at value, then it's a no-brainer. It needs to be done every time. So we need to educate our customers to just think about things in slightly different ways. And this kind of helps around when we're having discussions about some of the problems we touched on, about project feasibility, comparing suppliers, this kind of thing. we put a lot of effort into just trying to get them to not just think about what the daily rate is or how many features then we might get through in a sprint or something, but what other value are we getting? Are we creating an asset or are we creating a liability? Other ways of looking and moving the focus more to value, having sprint goals. For us, this is, I think, a bit of a sort of black belt thing in Agile. There's lots of techniques around which are quite easy to pick up around having points and breaking things into user stories and doing all these kind of techniques, but actually agreeing, getting the team to agree with the product owner or the customer, what is the goal of this sprint, and then keeping everybody focused on that throughout the whole sprint is really healthy for the project, and again it keeps everyone's eye on where the value is. So a sprint goal can be a hypothesis. Is this software going to affect users' behavior? Is this, if it was on Amazon, is this suggesting an alternative book? Does that mean you sell more books? So it can be an experiment that you want to get an answer to. So how many features you get in can vary, and you can still achieve that goal. And similarly, you can have high-level user benefits that you can have as a sprint goal. Another technique which we use, which is very similar, is what we call value milestones, and these can just be over more sprints, basically. So proof of concept, proof of technology, and that might be something we're working towards at the end of sprint 3 or sprint 4 or something like that. But keeping everyone's mind focused on that, rather than this was a list of features we wanted to get in. Even in an agile world, it's quite easy still to sit down at the beginning of the project, write a load of user stories, populate your backlog, and say, right, this is what we're going to try to get to by the end of sprint 3. That, again, is cost mentality, rather than what are we trying to achieve, what high-level goals are we trying to get to. And then, finally, on this point, is about being very clear about, as for us as Bluefruit, we are delivering a service, and so we have to think about our value proposition. So for Bluefruit, our value proposition is about delivering quality, and we spend a lot of time communicating this to our customers, again, so they can understand the value that we're delivering. So when comparing suppliers, so this is our Bluefruit tree, and it helps. So there's stuff above the ground that they can see, like functionality, usability, reliability, that our customers are really aware of. But then we talk about this stuff under the ground, about the health of the code, how scalable, how easy is it to add features, what's the life of this code base going to be, and how easy is it going to be to live and work in there. So that's about moving the focus to value. That's tool number 1. Tool number 2 is about building trust. So this relates to these problems around being held to account, and if there's a lack of trust at the beginning of a relationship. So I think all good presentations need a kind of a quadrant model in them, and this is my quadrant model for this one. We've got commitment versus trust. So we start a relationship down here with low commitment, low trust. We've just started the relationship, we've just met. And we want to get up to this kind of green zone up here where we've got lots of trust and lots of commitment. We don't always need lots of commitment, but usually if it's a big project, then our customers will want us to commit to that project. Because us leaving the project halfway through or doing something else, that would be painful to them. Often we're in a kind of single supplier situation. A lot of our customers, kind of their buyers or whatever, will view us as a single source for this kind of component, the embedded software. But also the other way around, we like some commitment, especially if we're allocating a large team to a project. If we put 8 or 12 developers onto a project, we don't want them suddenly at short notice to put the project on hold. So commitment is important. And the kind of traditional way of getting there is to just use contracts. Right from day one, very early on the discussion, is just go straight from no trust, no commitment to let's get some commitment before we've built any trust yet at all. And I suggest that this is not such a great route to get up to the top right. So an alternative approach is to not worry so much about the crossing the T's, dotting the I's right from the beginning. Let's just deliver some value early. Let's not tie them into a 6-month contract right from day one or an 18-month contract. Let's just do a sprint. Let's just deliver a bit of value. Let them see how well we work. Let them understand the benefits and how we can deliver value early, how we can answer burning questions that they've got or their hypotheses and deliver value to their business. And then very quickly, that trust builds, and then the contracts come. You still need the contract when you start committing into the project, but it's just finding the right route and the healthy route to get to the top right. So that's my second tool. The third one is transparency. So really what I'm talking about here is still agile estimating, but it's how we use it and what we use it for. So yes, we estimate in points. We use sprints and velocity. We use cumulative flows and burn-ups. We're not trying to convert this into pounds and pence. We've got some different objectives here. We're using these points to monitor flow through the system, to make sure we haven't got a problem in testing or in code reviewing or something like that. We're using these points to monitor the pace of the project for diagnostic reasons. If the pace has dropped off, then we know there's some kind of problem that needs looking at. And then we can also use it for extrapolating. And this is where we use cumulative flows and burn-ups and all these kinds of things. But we're using it for the right reasons. So, and this toolkit doesn't really need to go near the contract. This is just about being transparent. Once we've built that trust, and it's an alternative way of kind of dealing with this kind of being held to account, but it's also about managing deadlines and budgets. So rather than trying to manage a deadline by saying we need these 50 features in by this deadline, or we need these 50 features in for this budget, actually what we do instead is we use these points, we estimate our backlog in points, we establish a velocity, and we can then project how many features we're going to get done by the end of the budget or by the deadline. And if the velocity goes a bit slower, that isn't a contractual issue, that's a project management issue. You need to either find out why it's slower, and you can come up with ideas of how to make it quicker, but assume it's going to carry on at that pace. And have discussions, grown-up discussions about what's in your backlog and how much of your backlog you're going to achieve. This isn't always the case, so we do projects with fixed budgets but without fixed scope, and then the elbow room has to be in that scope. Other projects, we have more flexible budgets. So just in summary, we've got 3 new tools here that we can try to help. One of them is moving focus to value, second is building trust, and third is this extra transparency, and using transparency to have a healthier relationship with the customer. So back to the 5 whys. Let's see if I can do this. That's cool. So we've basically got, if we can remember, value, trust, and transparency. So now we can look at these things, if we could still read them, and look at how we can solve some of these problems in a different way. So where we're comparing suppliers, we might start talking about value instead. Also, for the internal projects, we should not be focused quite so much on what the cost is going to be, but how much value we are going to deliver. Where we're managing expectations and keeping everyone happy, then transparency is really important. And not just managing them from day one, but managing them throughout the project. And also building that trust. We haven't mentioned about sort of contracts. So one of the reasons we might have done estimates was to feed into a contract and feed into that commitment. And the reason we have those, so if I'm going to click back to one here, this is also equally legible. We've got for contracts and the lack of trust and those areas, and we've got these solutions here. Okay, so we've got some other tools in our toolkit. How does that impact our contracts? So thinking about contracts, there's some things contracts are really good for. Some things contracts really don't help with. So contracts solve problems like protecting IP, defining payment terms, defining responsibilities, and there's lots more things like this which they're really good at getting down in black and white and making sure everyone's absolutely clear on those things. Contracts don't solve problems, like contracts don't help you make more accurate predictions. They don't help poor quality problems in the development team, and they don't help if your productivity is low in the team. So trying to make the contract solve those problems can actually make those problems worse. Trying to pin those things down just doesn't help at all. And some of these other tools, and agreeing with the customer and helping the customer understand how these agile tools can address some of those other problems instead, just allows you to pull that stuff out of the contract and just focus on the stuff that the contract's good at. So what do our contracts look like? Well, we've gone to purely time and materials contracts, basically. So we might have a fixed price for a sprint, but there's no commitment to how much we're going to get done in that sprint. And we never do fixed price, fixed scope anymore. The main reason for that really is it actually puts a downward pressure on quality. And we find Agile is actually pretty good at keeping a standard of quality using Agile practices like test-driven development and behavioural-driven development and all the other sort of toolkits. They really help push quality up. And we like to keep that there. And that's what working sprints is all about, is keeping that constant level. If you make a commitment to deliver a certain amount of scope for a certain price, then as the budget starts running out, there's pressure on the team, if the budget is visible to them, to try and cut corners. And so that's not actually to anybody's benefit at all. My next point is contracts do need to be agile shaped as well. So by that I mean you can't just use a traditional standard contract that you would have used years ago. You need a contract which talks about sprints and talks about iterating the requirements and talks about having a product vision and talks about these things. So Joanna, who's talking after here, in the audience and wave, she helped us draw up our contracts, which do talk about Agile and do fit our processes so that they're actually meaningful. And my last point here is just a reminder about ramping up that commitment, so making it appropriate to where you are in the project. So if you're just doing an experimental sprint, a one-off, you don't need to go to the same length as when you're getting into a much larger project. So, in summary, estimates can be helpful when they're used properly, but can be harmful if they're not. So they have a place, and don't try using them to solve problems that they're not good at solving. And similarly, contracts have a place and are critical for relationships which involve lots of money and big teams and lots of commitment, but use them to solve the right problems. And then focus on value, trust, and transparency for successful projects. Any questions?
So, imagine you're getting a piece of work for the customer. How do you initially recruit, or it's going to take a thousand of years in order to create more team?
Yeah.
Do you specify a minimum amount of P&M, you specify a minimum amount of hours? That will be rules and a maximum so that you can recruit and take the team forward?
We'll shape that with time. So initially we will just commit to doing a sprint, and there will be a very small amount of commitment. Once we're ramping up the project and we've scoped out the project and we can see it's going to be 6 months or something like that, then yes, we will get them to commit to the size of the team, and we'll work with the client about what size team they want and how long they want to commit to that for. And if delays do come up, then how we share the cost of that, and of basically a team being sat idle. So that would all be built into the contract. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. That's right. So that's a really good question. So the way that we've viewed this is often the customer is a larger entity. So there's a question about whether it's appropriate for an outsourcer to basically insure that larger entity against project risks. And a lot of those project risks are actually outside the supplier's control. So it kind of comes back to some of the points I made there around whether the contract's the right place to solve that problem. And if you bind the supplier in some way to delivering that, despite some unforeseen problems emerging, then how is the supplier going to deliver that? Well, they're either going to press them to start cutting corners, or maybe if they've been really good in their drawing up the contract, they've been great at putting a big contingency budget in to cover that. Well, contingency budgets aren't great for anybody because either as a supplier we're over generous with it, and then our customers lose out because it's costing them more money, or we're not very good at it, and then we then get the pressure to cut corners, and because we're not making money on the project anymore. It also, to do that, you have to define what the scope is and exactly what's going to be delivered, and that sort of cost mentality actually detracts away from the value. So you can end up in these situations where there's been emergent knowledge about where there could be some really great features. So they're going to sell loads more product or have much happier customers. But the contract says we've got to deliver these features that we thought of at the beginning. And so you get this very unhealthy relationship, whereas actually in time materials, as a supplier, and when you put all these transparency measures in place, as a supplier, you feel a very strong obligation every sprint to justify where you are, whether you're on track. Showing your cumulative flow is very truthful. You can't hide the fact that your velocity is lower than what you said. And on the cumulative flow, if everything's taking twice as long, you don't just move it back by a week. You double the whole schedule. You can't hide from that. And so everybody has to take that head on early and have an early discussion about it. And that actually leads to much more successful projects than if there's this kind of conflict that you're behind time, you've made a commitment, maybe we won't let the customer know yet because we're going to try and find a way of making up time. And so ultimately the time and materials approach actually leads to more successful projects and a healthier relationship. It takes some explanation to get all customers to understand that and see that. But the goal was an honest one, that we want the project to be successful. But people need educating because it is. No, because it doesn't happen suddenly. You see it coming from a long way off. But yes, some projects take longer than expected, and you have to figure out a way together of either trimming the scope together, or them having plenty of warning about having to raise more investment, or whatever's required. But these problems exist in delivering projects, whether we're an external supplier or whether it's an in-house team, and what we need is just the best toolkit for solving those problems in the healthiest possible way, really. And actually, as an external supplier, we've got this absolute obligation every sprint to give that truthful information. And so actually, our customers are kind of better informed. Okay. Yeah. Not necessarily. Although those large contracts will have fixed requirements, they will tend to be high-level requirements. So we have that situation on aerospace projects. They often look like that. And what we try to do is create some elbow room. So it's quite possible, say, for example, if you've got there might be a high-level requirement that a system needs to, it might be a black box system that needs to do logging. Actually, within that high-level requirement, you might have a dozen stories, and you can create flexibility within there. And as long as you achieve that minimum viable, then it can still work. The other kind of trick that you can play in those situations is they tend to be waterfall in terms of the nature of the bidding process and the phases that you go through. And often there's still a sort of discovery phase, followed by a kind of implementation phase or something like that. And there can be opportunity to review budgets after the kind of discovery phase. What we've done is kind of front-loaded that discovery phase and actually basically get started on the project, rather than traditionally where that would be all doing design, analysis, lots of documentation about what it's all going to look like. We would just get some sprints underway and start discovering with actual code and start learning and start reinforcing what's going to happen in the construction phase. So it is possible, and we have done it. You do need to use some old tools in your toolkit as well, like contingency budgets and that kind of thing as well. But ultimately, you have to decide where those budget risks are. But more and more, the world, certainly in defence and aerospace, and there was the Department of Defence did a study about what caused project failures, and this kind of fixed budget mentality was one of the main drivers of that. And so actually a lot of these larger bodies are open to creating some flexibility in the way these projects are managed now. So there's more and more opportunities around that, I think. Just make sure I've understood your question. So the sort of iterative process, we end up with a kind of standard T's and C's, but with each client we have a discussion with them. So often what will happen, even when we're doing those experimental sprints, we might have sent them the T's and C's for them to start looking at. Yeah, and and often that happens kind of in parallel, and they send it to their legal team and starts giving some feedback about that. Yeah. It is really important, and actually one of the reasons it's really important is often our customers have a legal department and they can navigate it anyway, but it affects our team. So our team leads, I get our team leads to read the contracts, and when we get feedback from the customer about how a sprint sign-off is going to work at the end of the sprint or something like that, and the customer's got a question about that or a modification, then we have to include the team lead in that, because if the contract's going to be meaningful, then people actually need to be following those instructions. So actually the most important reason why it's in English is for our tech guys more than our customers. Yeah. We tend to do 2-week sprints. We do find it can vary actually during the life of a project. So towards the end of a project, we may switch to 1-week sprints, or we may stick with 2-week sprints and sometimes just do releases. Our sprints are actually kind of aligned with our commercials. So basically we, at the start of the sprint, we review the backlog with the customer. We do 3 amigos for our BDD, where we agree the acceptance criteria, the scenarios against those user stories. We get everybody to agree to those. We go away, we deliver those, we code them, test them, and at the end of the sprint, we do a demo. We have a test team who's done a release report on it, and we usually do a demo video as well. We find that's quite useful for key stakeholders who aren't there or maybe remote or something. And that's a kind of commercial cycle as well. And at that point, we put the invoice request in. When that's paid, we hand over, we give them access to all the source code, so that there's no, we're not tying them in, holding them to ransom in any way. So that commercial cycle we often keep at the 2 weeks, but we might provide a lightweight release mid-sprint or something where we need to tighter feedback loop. Yeah. We have quite a range of responses to that problem. So actually for some customers it's just right. Some customers it's quite onerous on them, and actually they still kind of need a product owner at their end who's going to invest quite a lot of time, and so we need to make customers aware of that they're going to invest that time, and the less time they invest, basically it can push the cost up. So they need to be aware of that. Whereas actually at the other end of the spectrum, something like tends to be more in the startup kind of area, it's not enough, and they want more interaction during the sprint, which is hard. We don't want too much requirement changing actually during the sprint. So we see it all basically, and we just have to balance that with the customer expectations and find ways of managing that. Yeah. It would depend a lot on the project. So sometimes it's even just half a sprint, just to answer an early question or something like that. But yeah, sometimes it might be 2 or 3 sprints. Okay. Yeah, we're out of time. Yeah. Yeah, I'm around today and tomorrow if anyone's got any more questions. But thank you very much.